Hello everybody, my name is Eddie Tofpik. I'm Head of Technical Analysis and Senior Markets Analyst at ADM Investor Services International Limited. We're part of the Archer Daniels Midland Group, and we're also the largest non-bank clearer in the world. I'm also Director of the Society of Technical Analysts, which is a UK-based society, a not-for-profit company, which is the oldest and one of the largest such societies in the world. I am pleased to welcome a fantastic panel here today. We're all going to be talking about future crises, or crisi, feels like. I'm not quite sure about that, but we're going to go anyway. And I'm going to introduce the panel to you, and then we're going to go in straight into the subject. So, Federica, could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Federica Strumia. I work for Neste as manager of middle office for all products. Neste is a Finnish refiner, which has become, in the past 10 years, the world's leading and largest producer of renewable and sustainable aviation fuel produced from waste and residual. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Scott, could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Scott Wellcome. I work at the Goodmills Group. We're Europe's largest wheat miller. I'm based in Vienna. We have operate 24 mills in 7 European countries, and I'm the Director of Grain Risk Management and Sourcing.
Thank you very much indeed. And Abhishek, could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. I work for ETG Group. I work as a Chief Risk Officer. We are the Africa-centric origination company. I'm also the CEO of the Purple Wallet, the ecosystem for the crop insurance and the asset oil insurance.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And Benjamin, last but not least, could you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Ben or Benjamin Tranier. I'm based in Zurich. I work for Commodities, the world's largest portfolio of energy commodities and trading and risk management solutions, so software company. I currently own the ION FEA commodity analytics products, so in charge of developing new metrics, new approaches, new optimization techniques, and the integration with the commodity management systems.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's a fantastic panel. We have not only a polling question, which I'd like to draw your attention to, which we're going to look at in a short while about what particular risk we're looking for next. But so if you could answer those questions on there, or it's a multiple choice, that would be brilliant. But also you can put individual questions in the Q&A function, which is a button on the bottom bar, and you can put those questions and I'll formulate those and put them to our audience, to our panelists, asking on your behalf, our audience. So the first question I'd like to put forward to is this. What sort of crisis can we expect next? And Federica, what are your thoughts on that?
For me, well, we start from a situation where we have been going through this COVID for a couple of years. And first of all, I would like to consider that what we have been going through should not be interpreted, as the title of this panel says, should not be interpreted as a black swan. So we, in our community, in our company, we don't consider that a black swan for several reasons. And in particular because this type of pandemics have been predicted and forecast in the scientific community for a long time. So I would not exclude that for that same reason, this could happen again. And also there is quite a good and strong link between the COVID and the type of pandemic infections and the global warming. It has been kind of discussed, and there are articles on lately published that say that there is a tie between the two, because in practice the global warming is destroying the biodiversity and the ecosystems are put at risk, and this frees a lot of new viruses and new potential situations. So I would not exclude, given this kind of literature, that this might happen again more frequently and also eventually also more disruptive. So I would expect that this will continue.
It's an interesting view upon that. It's one that I've not really seen before, but thank you for putting it forward. And something for us all to think about and go forward with. Scott, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the points that Federica made are valid and are sure top of many people's agendas. So just sort of thinking outside the box, I think possibly food inflation. I think that potentially could become a crisis, thinking Arab Spring that we saw a few years back. And then I think maybe a little bit close to home and maybe smaller but crises for different companies is staff shortages. I think a lot of people have moved, left jobs, don't want to go back to what they were doing. Mental health issues because of being locked down for the last 2 years. So I think those are sort of a couple of other, maybe not worldwide as such as we see with COVID, but certainly crises nonetheless.
That's a really interesting point, especially about the mental health side of things. I think the lockdown countries where that's happened, and some countries haven't had it as such, but those that have, it's definitely been something that's been affecting the people in that respect. Abhishek, what are your thoughts?
See, crisis always hit weakest the hardest. So with that context, the things have not changed. If you go back 1.5 years back, or in December 2019 or March 2020, nothing has changed as far as the issues are concerned. What has happened is the financial sector has become more away from the real world. Therefore, the banking sector is relying more and more in the capital markets, what will result in the form of more and more bubble, and the bubble burst. So financial crisis 1. Climate crisis is a defining crisis of the time. What does it mean? And if we have seen over the last the temperature increase in the last 50 years by 1 degree Celsius, that it will going to put up pressure on the asset prices, which is very bad for everybody, because it will impact your inflation, it will impact your food security, it will impact the international peace. The political crisis, if you talk about, is nothing has changed. It has even worsened. Whether we talk about Middle East or Asia, the things have gone bad. And finally is the pandemic crisis, which is, we don't know, in what shape, form, kind of a manner it will come. So it is very difficult to say which is going to come. But however, I think for me, even this crisis has happened, the other crises are still very open and in the near distance, because the current crises have worsened the things rather than benefiting the things.
Thank you very much. Those are very, very valid points. And Benjamin, what do you think? I mean, that you're coming from a different area than some of the others. So what do you think?
Absolutely. And really, I mean, coming from the software and technology world, there is actually one type of crisis that we should also consider is actually everything related to cyber threats. We actually saw that in the US, I think it was a month ago, 3-4 weeks ago, where actually Colonial, the main gasoline suppliers on the East Coast, actually got hacked and they had to pay a ransom. But it actually almost collapsed all the gasoline supply in the East Coast of the United States. Now, reading the news yesterday, actually even internet collapsed, right, for a few hours. Yeah. So, and that was yesterday. And that was, I've never thought that it could happen before yesterday, to be honest, right? No one would have thought that Google can go down. So I think that's something we need to consider also, all the risk related to technology, working from home, and I think we need to also start planning for this type of crisis.
Thank you very much. I mean, that point about Fastly and the Colonial Pipeline, I mean, those are very, very valid points. And they've come at a time when we're already weakened by what's been happening in the pandemic. So what sort of similar aspects do you think, what are the common aspects of the crisis that we're looking at, the future potential crisis? What common aspects do you think there might be? Federica, what do you think?
Well, they can come in a very abrupt way, especially if we are not prepared for those, like we were not for the pandemic. And they could also disrupt a lot of our assets and infrastructures, and could be also a threat for life. So if you want, there might be a couple of areas where we can identify this type of potential events, like events driven by men, by human against human, like the cyber attack. The cyber threat is something that is a modern translation of what we have seen in the humankind since centuries, no? Because you create an atomic bomb and then you give it to the man, and then the man can use it for good or for bad. Then there are also threats which come from, are led by nature, and are against demand. And this for me is the most critical one, the ones that we could lose control to a point where it can become really global. I don't underestimate the cyber threat and attacks, but still, I still think that it is more critical and more difficult to eradicate and to change this trend that is the climate change, the global warming that is going on for so long, and which the pandemic is just one of the potential aspects of that. So I think that basis that point of view, so for me being pandemic and similar aspects, the most important to observe, what we should notice as a general thing is that we need to learn, and we have learned this time, how to be faster in the way we react to this type of events. So how we can make faster decisions. So the decision-making process of a company, of a government, of a population can have been in the past very slow. And we have proven in many situations in these past years that we can adapt ourselves to these changes very fast and in a very efficient manner. So this is something positive that we need to bring for the other crises. And then, of course, the negative part, which leads us to make risk assessments on our potential threats, is about how events can, what can they eat and how can we prevent. The prevention would be in being part, making climate risk in general, with all the variants that we can identify, part of the strategy of a company. So climate risk could be huge events like floods or dry weather or fires impacting our assets, impacting our infrastructure, and then events, dramatic events impacting the supply and the supply chain, the supply chain, in sense that the feedstock could be difficult to find, could be rare. There could be disruption in the provision of the feedstocks, or the prices could be so high that they become unaffordable. And the same on the sell side, there could be problems in the delivery of our products, or the products, there could be destroying in the demand, and then the prices of our products could drop massively and dramatically. We could see delays in our deliveries. So these are all things that, in my opinion, we can really apply also in our approach to be at least a bit ready for future events. So we do a lot of scenario analysis, and scenario analysis should become the new normal. So value at risk and all these other metrics that are, maybe they still have a value and they still have an importance, but they should be moving into some more scenario approach analysis.
Thank you very much for that. So Scott, what do you think in your area? What are similar aspects of all the different crises that we're looking at as potential future risks? Is there any commonality amongst them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to get my head around what Federica just said in the nightmare scenario she's planning for the future. So I'm trying to hope that this humans are a bit more adaptable, and we evolve and we do grow from this. But yeah, I think there will be similar in their outcomes, in that the globe will be affected differently. Certainly, as already mentioned, the weakest will suffer more. So I hope that we've learned from that, and we help the poorer countries better than we have done this time. I think that's been a big lesson for us. I think a more efficient answers and solutions from governments, because I think in certain respects they've did it, and now I have to admit that it's been new for a lot of the governments, and they've not known what to do for the best. But if I just take Europe as a whole, I mean, we're supposed to be one European Union, and we had 27, 28 countries.
Hold on. One European Union?
Okay, yeah, exactly. all acting as individual countries, and still today with the strange border restrictions we have. So how are they going to be in the future? I don't know. I think they will affect us the same. I think we're probably a little bit more resilient than we were, and we've learned to adapt, and we've learned to look after ourselves a bit more, because maybe some of us have felt a bit left out and not helped by the governments. I guess my biggest concern is that governments in the world have thrown astronomical amounts of money into the economy to help support economies. And if something like this happens in the short time, do governments have the ammunition to do the same again? And so the next pandemic could be even worse for many people. And that's probably my worry. Whatever risk mitigations companies might put into place, can economies survive? Can governments provide that support?
I would recommend you listen to Mark Oswald, my colleague at ADM ISI. He did a whole thing about the government leverage on debt, but I'm not even going to go down that route. But I appreciate that very, very much. Abhishek, what do you think? Are there common aspects between all these things?
Yeah. See, a very, very valid question from the risk management point of view. I think that is a practical risk management. See, if to answer this question, let's go back into history. The first financial crisis, if I'm right, was the tulip crisis that happened in the 17th century. Then thereafter, it happened in the Great Depression, and thereafter 30, 40 years, nothing. Then the various intermittent crises, then the financial crisis, great financial crisis of 2009 and now. So the important takeaway from that is, until now, until this time, it was the macroeconomics or the liquidity or the finances which was basically taking the shape as a crisis. With this crisis, it has hit the microeconomics of commodities, which is a very dangerous thing because it is like hitting the genes of the world. Whether it is a climate crisis or a geopolitical crisis or any crisis which happens, it is going to impact the microeconomics more. And this may, and God forbid if it happens, this is going to worsen those aspects more, resulting in asset problems. Asset bubble is already being created, political problems, climate resulting in the food shortage, inflation, and so on and so forth. Therefore, similarity will be definitely with the microeconomics, shaking throughout the world. The difference will be, and which will be similar to this crisis, will be the microeconomics, supply chain, inflation, asset bubbles, and so on and so forth.
I think that's a very, very valid point. I was thinking about the South Sea bubble and the various New York banking crises have happened over the years up until the crash of 29. There were a few of them, one after another. It was only one 100, a little more than 110 years ago. There was another one. Okay, Benjamin.
Yeah,
you've brought up cyber attack, and I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about, because do you think that's been brought forward by the pandemic, or was it going to happen anyway, or has it been delayed by the pandemic, the cyber attacks that we're seeing?
I think actually with the pandemic, we're seeing more and more cyber attacks, right? So the one at Cologne, that's just one. We saw a few in the past, actually. So we saw a few actually commodities company being hacked and having big troubles to actually continue their operations, and actually at some point also blocking the supply chain. I think with the pandemic and with everyone working from home, we've seen a lot more. And we're going to see more. And I think it's important also to train all the employees at ION. We're actually pretty proud of doing a lot of internal training for that. Now, in terms of your question around, similar aspects of all the future potential crises, I think to me, the key similar aspect is really big losses, potential big losses. At the end of the day, all the companies, the risk is they're going to lose money. And I'm sure we're going to talk now about, what can we do to prevent that. But I think when we look at all these potential events, ultimately from a business perspective and from a company, we need to keep in mind the loss of revenue and everything that goes with it. Also, now on the positive note on similar aspects, I think we learn, right? So we talk about the human being, and I think we learn after each crisis. Now we've learned a lot after the pandemic. If a year and a half ago, someone was said that I can just, be with my kids at home for like 3 months in a row and having my 6 years old being able to attend on our own, virtual classes, no one would have thought about that, or stop traveling, right? I've been traveling on a weekly basis across the globe for 12 years and from one day to the other, not jumping on a plane for 6 months in a row. Yeah. So we learned about that. And I think that's also the positive aspect of it.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, dear audience, please put your questions. We've got a couple coming up, which I'm going to deal with in a little while. Please put your questions on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There's also the poll. Please answer that. That'll be closing up in about 5 minutes. and then we'll discuss the results of that. Federica, now we have an out of control situation at various points. We've had an out of control situation. How do we control this out of control situation? What can we do to prepare to make ourselves ready?
Well, we need to kind of, as I said, I think that making learning from what we have experienced and also try to guess what can happen next and do scenario analysis. Scenario analysis are very good because they force you to think about all potential plausible but also dramatic, to go back to Scott's words, events. What could happen and how can I act to limit, mitigate, or stop this from happening? So, as I said, with the new, well, in the short term, if something happens, there is not much that we can really do because it's too short. As Scott said, after governments have pulled so much money into nations now, they are not ready to do it again in maybe 2 months or 6 months time. But apart from the just quick actions that we can do in the short term, in the longer term, I think that it's already happening, this change, because companies have been shaken by this crisis and they have accelerated a process which was already ongoing, which is the movement into a completely different way of making businesses. So making a more sustainable business in line with these ESGs and so on and so forth. And all these new activities that are very probably happening, they are already happening and will keep happening, then we need to be ready also for that, because well, one option is that we keep doing business as usual, and then we can do this catastrophic scenario analysis that we have mentioned. But in the case we are going to correct this and we move fast into a different world, a different solution, there are other risks that are going to arise, which can also transform into opportunities. So this is the positive side of the coin. Like I can mention very quickly a few of them, but as I say, the climate risk, you could also consider that in a way that you can do your investments in a much more intelligent manner, keeping into account all the potential disruptions to people, to assets and infrastructure. You can also take into account the geopolitical risk, the reputational risk, the counterparty risk. They are going to take very different dimensions in future. Geopolitical risk, because the scenario and the balance of the commodities will change. There will not be petroleum anymore, probably. There will be other type of commodities. Other countries will be the main producers or main demand drivers of these products. So the geography and the landscape will change. Reputational risk is not only your financial statement, which makes your own reputation. It's also how you are behaving in respect to these ESG elements, variables. So it's a multivariable problem, which will establish which ones are the good companies, which are the not good companies. And then the reputational risk also in the sense which counterparties are you dealing with is probably something that will also change the scenario. Last but not least, just to add, market risk. So market risk management will change. We are already seeing that because, for example, in my company where we buy vegetable oil, animal fat, to produce renewable diesels, which is pricing in the standard classical way that uses diesel price curves. So we buy a completely different product where there are no correlations, there are no kind of relationship between these two elements. So we have to invent, we have to create new markets, establish new relationship, and maybe the old ones, the old classic old correlations will change in shape. So these are new market risks that we need to analyze, being able to analyze, to identify. New instruments will grow. So these are all opportunities, can be threats, but also opportunities.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a comprehensive look at it. Dear audience, please, the poll is going to be closed now, and we're going to shortly have the results of those. But in the meantime, Scott, you mentioned about staffing being an issue and mental health, amongst other things. Can we control these things? Can we look to maybe control these and other things? What things would you look to try and stop this out of control situation if we have one again?
Yeah, I don't think you can fully control it, but definitely you can put in place some procedures to mitigate it, to make people's lives better. I think it was quite clear that after we all got over the initial shock of being sent home and having to work from home, and then getting everything in place to be able to work, then it was the kids were at home, so how do you balance helping your kids and then being there doing your job? And I think we quickly found that we had to put in place the fun aspects that you had when you were at work. So we started to have some online get-together, social events online, sending little gift packages around to the staff to say, look, we still think of you, even though we can't see you face to face, we're still thinking of you. Just genuine keeping in touch with each other with a phone call or a little message. That's sort of the soft skills. Yeah. I think that's certainly in place. And I think what we need to do, and we will do once we can meet up, is to take those opportunities, because we've all done it. You all say, oh yeah, I'll catch you in a couple of weeks, and something happens and you don't. But this, if nothing else, the last 18 months has told you, you might not be able to see them in 2 weeks. So if you can, go and see that person, or go and meet your client, or see that customer, or do what you said you were going to do. So I think it's don't put off tomorrow what you can do today, and be adaptable, be empathetic to people, understand that life isn't simple at home. Working from home isn't great. I mean, 5 days a week for me, after a while, wasn't much fun. I was desperate to get back to the office. So take each individual as they are, work around that, and yeah, just be human, I guess, at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Thank you very much on that. And it's brought to my mind that all of us speaking here, we either have people in our companies who had to arrive. I mean, Scott, you had people who had to be there to mill the wheat. Abhishek and Federica and Benjamin as well, and my company as well. We had to have people there doing things on the physical side. Now, Abhishek, what sort of things in your area can you think of that might be or can reinforce what's already been said to try and stop this out of control situation?
Yeah, I'll try to be as brief. I think most of the points are covered. See, out of control is difficult. Really out of control can be managed, and it can be managed by 4 stuff, according to me: people, process, technology, and behavior. It is like you managing the COVID crisis. You don't wear mask. That is like people don't communicate. You don't have a platform to do it. The process is related to social distancing. I'm just trying to do the analogy. The process needs to be, we have robotics, RPAs to be, to be incorporated in your companies so that your processes become strong. Technology, digitization, automation, we have been talking since morning. So that takes care of, you have the PP kit, one in when you get into the ward for the COVID. And the last is a behavior. People have to really realize that, when there is a lockdown, there's a real lockdown. So that is a behavior. So adoption to the crisis, the next crisis will be based on how well the company has the process being automated, digitized, how the people are, can communicate and the change management is there, how the technology embraces for all the strategic initiatives, and how the behavior and the change management works these 3 things out. So I think if we do that, I believe it may help us.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, those things are very, very key to what we need to do looking forward. Benjamin, what can you add to this conversation you think will be valid looking from your point of view?
So I'm going to bring a little bit of math actually to that conversation. So to the market risk. So the market risk traditionally has been using models following what's called a log normal distribution, which is you distribute your price and you try to look at the frequency of how many times it happens, basically. Now, as the name says, log normal works just fine when everything is normal or as expected, right? And that's what people has been using to try to predict their risk and also hedge their risk. So when you look at value at risk, for example, then most of the people are using a log normal models, which is absolutely fine. And it works in 97% of the case, which will be 2 sigma, 99% of the cases. However, what we see with the pandemics is, okay, once every 3 years, every 5 years, something is going to happen and is going to have a dramatic impact on your business. And we don't know what, and we cannot predict that. So I think the value at risk approach is absolutely fine, and the log normal distribution to model your risk is absolutely fine. But as Federica mentioned, you also need to add stress testing and back testing. So you actually can think about, okay, what happens if now all the power prices goes to minus 30 euros for a week? Or what happens if we have something else happening, or the Suez Canal is blocked and I cannot move my products? How that's going to impact my business? So by using techniques to start analyzing the tail of the distribution, so all the events which are very unlikely to happen but has a big impact on your portfolio, you start actually getting more control on your risk, and you can start diversifying. I think that's also the key, right? So you have tools to use like new models like the extreme value theory, EVA, that actually allows you to quantify the risk and start visualizing the risk in case of unpredictable events. So I think that's really the key to me. And I think really for companies, what we see in our customers, we see our customer, they want to start focusing on prevention rather than the treatment. I
think that's brilliant. That's exactly what we should be doing, looking at prevention. Now, I think that was a very interesting points you've made, especially about the extreme value theory, which I want to know more a bit about, but I'll do that separately. I'd like to now give you all the results of this poll that we've had. What will be the nature of the next crisis, in your opinion? And we've had a sample around a few, sort of just around about 100 people or so. Political, 25%. Climate, 45%, the highest. Financial, 20%, so just under the political crisis. Pandemic, none. Other, which I'm interested in what the other might be, 10%. So we're looking primarily at climate, with potentially political or financials being the next one. And I think that's a very interesting way that people are looking at this situation. Now, I'd want a few words, comments on that. Federica, can you give a comment on that very quickly?
Well, for me, the way I see it is that for me, pandemic is related to climate change. I see these two things very similar to each other. So it's not surprising me that the first fear that people have is to face a climate change event. And
I agree, but it's interesting that nobody put 0% on that.
Well, I don't know. I read articles and I have a scientific background, so probably this is my bias. But I have the belief that this is happening and it will continue happening. And yeah.
What about you, Scott? A few words. What do you think about that, the results of that poll?
I guess I'm not surprised, because climate is such, for want of a better expression, a hot topic. But to be honest, I'm surprised that financial and political are not higher, because I do think they affect people more directly than climate. I think at the end of the day, people ultimately look at what hurts their pocket. And I think political and financial does that a bit more than climate. I still think climate is yet to really affect deeply enough people in the areas where they can make change. I mean, do I say my life is worse off because of climate change? I have to say probably not. If I live somewhere else in the world, probably. So I'm a little bit surprised that financial and or political is not a little bit higher, but climate is the key thing at the moment. ESG is everywhere.
Well, yeah, but this is all literally just a snapshot, and it's at this particular time, and people change their minds. It's not like a debate where you ask before and ask afterwards.
Yeah, but I agree. I'd like to know what the 10% other is.
I would like to know what the other 10% is as well. Abhishek, what are your thoughts on that poll? Just a few thoughts on that.
See, it is a very difficult question, but I'll give equal probability to all three risks that we talked about. In fact, 4. The pandemic, now it is a new normal. It can change its shape. So I'll still assign 20% probability against what my fellow audience believe. So I think it can come from anywhere right now. Climate, people are talking, so expectations are more. Therefore, I'll take, if I have to give it a slightly lower rating, 1 or 2% here and there. The financial bubble is already there, so slightly offsetted by financial bubble. Now, I think it will be a correlated one, or 20% to the unknown. But I think I like to give equal probability to every 4 of them, and 5th is 20%. What my fellow people believe it's 10%, I'll give it slightly more, because a crisis is which people don't anticipate. So that becomes a crisis. So hence, I'll give 20% weightage to that as well. What is that? I don't know.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Benjamin, what do you think about this poll?
So I'm actually also going to bring a little bit of math into that. I think there is also another dimension that is quite important here, is also the time, the length of the crisis, right? Especially when you start talking about climate. One thing is an earthquake. Another thing is the global warming, right? So it has also different impacts. And I think to all these crises, I think an important metric is actually the mean reversion. So how long does it take to go back to normal? I mean, earthquake or polar vortex in New York, okay, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. Global warming, it's a global change. It's actually never going to go back to the mean. So I think that's a dimension that we also need to take into account on this, on the next crisis. It's not only the probability of occurrence of the crisis, but it's also the shape of the crisis over time.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, I'm going to sort of like fold in one of the questions from our audience on this. Now, we've had massive dislocation because of COVID. Commodities supply chains have actually stood up quite well to this. What do you think is the main reason that the commodity supply chains have held up so well? And what can we take going forward into a next future global crisis? So it's a positive thing. We're looking at a global supply chain which was stretched, but it held. What can we take from that going forward? Federica, what do you think?
But, well, I don't know. I think it also depends on the type of commodity, because there have been commodities in the oil sector which have not been really pressured down enormously, because, for example, if you think of the jet sector, well, maybe assets have not been impacted, but the demand has been destroyed
We're
enormously.
talking about supply.
On the supply side, okay. On the supply side, well, yeah, I just can say on the petroleum side, it's true. We were not really hugely impacted, although, but for the future, I don't know. I think that this can reassure in some way, because if a pandemic happens again, I don't think that we can see differently. But pandemics can have different forms. And one more thing, pandemic for me is just one possible expression of a climate change, is a consequence of something that is not, it can happen and can impact anything. So next time could happen in a different format. So we cannot really exclude all these things from our scenario analysis, I think. We have seen WTI negative some months ago, so.
Yes, but I mean, that was because of a specific situation with Brent.
I know, but yeah.
Anyway, so I appreciate what you're saying. So mainly your supply chain has been stretched, maybe, and demand is another thing, but the supply chain has been good, and you think that's a good thing going forward. Scott, different market, different area, different commodity. Your supply chains have been obviously stretched as well. What do you think has been that you can take away positive from that and go forward to the next crisis?
I think definitely a benefit for us is our shortened supply chain. We operate wholly in Europe, and all our supply, whether it's raw materials, packaging, everything else is within a short distance. And that's certainly been a benefit for us. When I first arrived, I kind of questioned it. Should we not be shipping in from outside of Europe or this, that, and the other? But in hindsight, that would have been a mistake, and we could have been in serious trouble. So I think our shortened supply chains, and I think many countries will be looking where they can to try to reduce their supply chains, whether it's for the reason I've just mentioned, or because they're concerned about the climate and they want to obviously reduce travel and emissions. I think also we've benefited because we're in a digital age. I don't believe we could have operated as efficient as we did today if this had happened maybe 10 or even 5 years ago. I mean, we can literally run a mill remotely. We can intake, we can outtake almost remotely without the need for people to get out their trucks and stuff. So I think we have benefited from the digital age. But I definitely think looking to reduce the length of a supply chain where you can will be an area where lots of companies will be looking at.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Abhishek, from previous conversations we've had and panels here, you're very much into the regionalization and localization of the supply chain. What can you take from your supply chain that's been held and been strong, and you can go forward into the next crisis?
Yeah, I think there is no doubt there was a massive dislocation of the supply chain. The commodities player benefited because of any volatility in the supply side of it. There is a volatility in the prices, the typical microeconomics, right? The key takeaways or what we worked on is the decentralization, regionalization, trying to have the supply chain focus on those parameters. That helps to take the advantage of these disruptions even more. And some of my fellow panelists were also talking about using this for the commercial opportunity. I think if we at ETG have been focusing on that, and that helped us, and some of the other companies as well, especially in our case because we were into soft commodities, the essential commodities. So it really helped us in all the aspects.
Thank you very much. And Benjamin, in your area, what have you taken as a positive that you're going to use in your supply chain to go forward into potentially the next crisis?
Well, so I mean, I think supply chain here, I mean, in the software industry is not that relevant. What I will say here is about really the diversification. I think that's the key to ensure that the supply chain is still operating as expected when you have a crisis. I think here diversification is a key, and to that is really important to understand where your risk is and know where to diversify.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we have some more questions, but we're running out of time. And for those who are looking to go on to control and risk reporting, the next session, I've got to go over there and go away pretty quickly from this session to actually join that one. But before I leave, I'd like to ask each of our panelists for one phrase of 7 words or less, a sentence if you like, that people can take away from this and to bear in their mind. So, Federica, what do you think?
Well, for me, it would be don't be scared by the unknown and by changes, and transform these all into opportunities.
Okay, we'll take 7 words out of that, but that'll be
take
fine.
Take some out, yeah. Sorry.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Scott, what would you say in 7 words or less?
Be adaptable, stay positive, and enjoy life.
6. Well done. Thank you very much. Abhishek, what would you say in 7 words or less?
That is tough, but let me try. Crisis and the crisis management is in your hands.
Right. Okay. Yes, that'll fit in. I'll take that, but that'll fit in. Benjamin, what would you say?
And I like 7 words. It's a prime number. So add advanced analytics to your risk policies.
Good enough. I'll take that as well. Panelists, thank you very, very much. Audience, thank you very, very much. It's been a fantastic session. I really appreciate you being here.